Welcome to Testing Experts with Opinions, an inspired testing podcast aimed at creating conversations about trends, tools, and technology in the software testing space.
Welcome everyone to another one of these podcasts. We haven't done one in a while, so it feels a bit strange doing one of these again. It's well overdue, and you'll probably notice a face on the screen that you've not seen before. So we'd like to welcome Ezanne Grobler. Ezanne is with Qualiblaze, and the reason that we asked her to be a guest on the podcast is because she presented at Eurostar, at the Eurostar conference back in June, and she presented on a very interesting topic around metrics, around testing, and I think she titled it "The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly." And it's something that we want to look at today, discuss, and possibly debate. So, Ezanne, I don't know whether you want to take a moment just to introduce yourself, and then we can take it from there.
Thanks so much, Leon. Yes. Good day, everyone. My name is Ezanne Grobler, as Leon introduced it. I've been in testing for the best of my adult life, and without giving my age away, more than 20 years. But you're passionate about the topic, passionate about the industry, and needless to say, I'm actually passionate about the topic metrics per se. Not that I'm an expert, but I'm going to try and share with you guys my insights, and then, like Leon said, let's debate it a little bit. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so as Leon mentioned, the topic was called "The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly," but without going into too much detail about it, we started off with the alignment of quality metrics and quality measurements. And what you will see on the screen is 4 quotes of typically gurus in the measurement and metrics framework. The first one is Peter Drucker, who's been seen as a guru in business. And he said, if you don't measure it, you can't manage it. Lord Kelvin, who was a British scientist, he said, you can't improve something if you can't measure it. And then Jerry Weinberg, who's probably the father of testing, he said, quality is value to some person or persons or whatever someone finds valuable. And then James Bach and Michael Bolton added to Jerry Weinberg's definition that who matters. So understand who cares. And I know from a previous podcast with you guys, which I watched, is Jan, you typically actually said that, so what? So, and that's exactly it. It's getting us into that definition. But I think what I've found and what I've learned over the years in specific with testing metrics is we so often focus so much on the numbers that we actually forget about the story behind the numbers. We don't paint the picture, or we don't provide a proper narrative to those numbers. And then ultimately, what is extremely important for me, and what was an aha moment for me, was who are you reporting to? Directly in line with what James Bach and Michael Bolton actually said is, who do we report to? And that actually brings us to the point, and Johan, I'm again going to quote you, we exist to provide information, but what value does that information bring is ultimately what is important. Steve, I see you very wide now on my screen and my
yeah. I think that was just the stream. I didn't want to interrupt mid-flow, but do you think, because it's just made me think straight away, do you think testers are guilty of like just reporting because we think we need to report?
I think testing is actually guilty of thinking that the world around us actually understand our lingo and understand our science and understand our world. And as a result, because we're so to-do driven, we often actually get into a place where we've got these metrics that actually make sense for us, or these numbers that make sense for us. And we've got so many things to say that we just immediately jump into that instead of taking a step back and maybe get to understand your stakeholders and where do they actually want to align to, and what is that they need to hear from us instead of just what we want to share with them.
Thanks, Ezanne. Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Okay. So my next slide, not exactly sure whether we're going to get there. Yes, but my next slide is just bringing us then into traditional metrics, and I think this is a typical ISTQB answer in terms of testing metrics, and that highlights the fact of there's a process, there's a project, and there is the product. So process is typically identifying the test management efficiencies. Time to market or the business return on investment is pretty much in the corner of project. And then, needless to say, close to our hearts as testers are product metrics. Anything related to the quality of the product, the ecosystem, where do we actually want to go and report to that. So in my experience, we actually pretty much focused on this. But what I found over the years, and this was a key point in my talk, was typically in the project management triangle, one actually looks so often to the scope and the time and the budget. And one understands in project management the interconnectedness of scope, time, and budget, and bringing that to the point of understanding that if time decrease, budget sometimes needs to increase, or scope need to decrease. So from a project management perspective, we understand that these things is so tied to one another, but we actually miss it in the testing side of things. And this is where we actually created then another triangle with process, product, and project still there, but bringing 4 additional groups of metrics into the conversation. And that is more related to coverage, people, as well as risk. We ultimately test to reduce risk. But then the 7th one in terms of the metrics was confidence. And even though it's a softer metrics, it's always important when we are in a testing project to constantly engage with your stakeholders and get their confidence levels and bring that into the narrative as well. And I think it was Stefan that said in a previous podcast that you need to see metrics holistically. You can't see it in isolation. I can't give you product metrics without project metrics, without process metrics, or any of the other 7 or the other 4 of the matrices. And I think it's once we at testing understand that these things are interconnected in the way that similar to the project management triangle, that we also have the ability to start sharing the story around that. So yeah, ultimately for me, there's one last slide that I want to share with you guys, was then bringing the approach towards testing metrics into the conversation. And this was quite important for me also, to not just a aha moment for myself, but also to share with the audience is the importance of stakeholder engagement, the so what, or the who do you actually report to. And once you identify your stakeholders, to understand their business objectives and literally know why do you test. And once you actually get to link the why do you test with the testing objectives and bring that together, it's almost like a set of requirements. You can then go and identify your test metrics. I think what is extremely important is before you go on a tangent and start actually reporting on those metrics, is again almost similar to a test plan where you need to do a walkthrough and share with your stakeholders. The concept is consult again with your stakeholders on the metrics. And once you're actually in agreement as to we've got the right things, then the 2 little green bubbles at the bottom actually helps you to start identifying and say, well, if we want to report on this, we need to collect that data. We need to gather that data. We need to have our frameworks and our tooling in place so that we can collect that data, so that by the time you actually start with reporting, it's an efficient way of communication. It doesn't take you hours and days on end to actually get to that storytelling. But I think what we've also learned over the years is that by the time you start reporting and you start actually communicating to your stakeholders, typically like business requirements, they actually change their minds, and then now they want a different opinion or a different thing, or you trigger something in their world and it's like, but wait, what about this and what about that? And this is the last little bubble then in terms of continuously improve, but be flexible enough. I think that was also for me another thing, back to the green bubbles, is that one needs to build your frameworks in such a way that it's flexible to pivot, because not two of your stakeholder groups actually are interested in the same information coming from testing. And you need to be flexible enough and have the ability to pivot easily enough to actually share with them the information. I think a last comment on this, and then we're very much open for debate, is Johan, it was again something that you said in a previous podcast, is the higher you start reporting into the organizational structure, the less information they need. Yeah. And I think this is sometimes where we as test managers actually go wrong. Is you've got your one set of data and you think that you can spray paint the whole stakeholder landscape with that one set of data, and not necessarily the right thing to do. So that is me. I'm going to stop sharing.
Awesome. Thank you, Ezanne. Any comments?
Thank you, just a couple of comments. The first one around your pyramid and time and budget and quality, I think is an interesting one. So when I did my research around exactly this topic to say, are those things actually important? And what I found is that that's good for a project, but more importantly is stakeholder alignment, business alignment, and then client, the people using the systems alignment of that value. And I think if we've had many conversations the last month or two, really, Leona and clients, to say that testing should start translating its value back to the business and back to the people actually using the system. And it's interesting that you show that, and you took it one further to add more dimensions into that. But I've seen that in my research as well, that those things are important, and we focused a lot from a testing perspective on those aspects because we deem them important. But after this talk and after the research, we've seen that there are actually other things that we need to report on. And and you closed off by looking by talking about who do we report and what should we report. And if we look at the extra dimensions of business value and user value, then it will hopefully force us as test managers to start reporting on those things, and not only numbers of tests and numbers of automated tests and test coverage, because the community out there in your business, they don't really care about those things. So I think it's important, and that's what you said as well, Ezanne, is to look at who you report to, who's going to read that report, and what do you want them to know about the numbers in that report. And if it is your test lead, sure, you want to look at test case, you want to look at coverage, you want to look at automation. If it's your business unit director, they don't care. They just want to know that this feature will add this value and there's a risk associated or no risk associated to it. And it's really important to really sit and think who's going to read that before you get into that.
Absolutely.
Stefan?
No, I agree with. I think the thing that resonates with me most is the word story, the storytelling, because I've spent countless hours also building graphs and then showing this and that and the other, and I think, oh, this is going to be excellent. People are going to love it, and then I find nobody really cares. And at the end of the day, all they look at is that RAG status, green, red, or orange, and that's all they want, because they're not necessarily that passionate about the topic. They just want to know, can we go live, or is it too risky? So that storytelling is important. I think as a testing experts, bringing that holistic picture and bringing it all together, that's the real value that we're adding. I think anybody can put a graph to say this amount of tests have been executed, but like Jan, you said, so what? So it's pulling that all together and knowing how to pivot when you speak to each person, because like you said, each person will be interested in something else, and telling that story, but adjusting the story depending on who the person is that you're engaging with. And there's a level of EQ also, I think, involved in that storytelling. It's not just a factual thing. And I think us as testers, we need to practice that. I think it's not always easy to do that. Yeah.
Just what I've got two like client examples of dashboarding and how weirdly it can go. I think the red, amber, green one is like what I think is probably the most effective metric you can. Like if you're going to pick one thing to show somebody, it would be like the RAG status of how testing is going. So like we're behind schedule, the test day is not available, and that's why we're red. As an example, I was like everything's perfect, so pipeline's looking good, it's green. But then that's from one client where that was used quite heavily and really successful, I thought, and quite easy to actually get into more detail if they needed it. But then on the other extreme example, I've had a stakeholder that said to me, I just want to see a pie chart of the number of tests that you've done versus the number that we have versus the number that you haven't done. And I said, totally could not produce that. Why? He's like, I like looking at those graphs. And that was his requirement. I just want to have a nice, pretty graph. So, but then when I dig into it, I dug into it a little bit, like one of his senior stakeholders wanted that in another presentation. So instead of just saying to me, I want this information because the stakeholder is asking me, he's like, no, I want you to make this pretty graph for me because then I can cut that graph out and I can put it in another presentation I'm going to give somebody else. So that importance of like knowing why somebody asking for the information that you're presenting them. Sometimes that might even be a logical reason. It just be like, I like the look of them. And all the other testing projects I've been on, I've had these graphs. So it must be what we have to see stakeholders. So, okay, we'll just produce one. It's not a problem. But if anyone's had a similar experience where a stakeholder's made like a really bizarre request of your metrics or your reporting, you've just, okay, sure, maybe I can challenge that discussion or just go with it.
So I think based on what everyone said and back to what Ezanne presented up front, it's almost a bit of a horses for courses type of scenario where you need to understand the environment you're in and you need to understand what's going to appeal to people. And I think depending on the industry you're in, certain industries will be very heavily focused on metrics and it'll be important from a compliance and regulatory perspective that certain metrics are shown and in place and that sort of thing. But what criteria would you say teams should use to select the most relevant metrics for their specific testing processes? So, are there specific criteria that we can touch on, which would actually make it easier for someone to decide what's most relevant?
I think I'll give it a go in the sense that Leon, horses for courses is again so important. You need to understand the business objectives and you need to understand what is important for them. And then on top of that, so the beginning of a project would have certain criteria and certain metrics based on what they would like to say. And I think Steve positioned it so well by saying some people are so used to certain metrics, defect density or turnaround time of a defect or whatever, but they don't even understand what does it actually tell. And one needs to remember that. And I think as the program continues and you start identifying risk areas within the project, but through a testing lens, you're going to start focusing on certain things more than other things. I mean, if turnaround time of defects actually start hampering the go live date and that we don't get through the testing sufficiently and fast enough, then focus starts actually moving into that metrics more than what it is necessary in another, where sometimes it is the scope is too big and the time is too little, and we need to start focusing on the burn down chart and actually start highlighting that to people. So I think this is the funny thing or the difficult thing in the world of testing is that you constantly need to pivot. You constantly need to understand the bigger picture of the program. And I think we all probably the only stream or the only area within the project that needs to dance on so many different beats than anyone else.
Ezanne, I think that's super important. That's why I also find sometimes if I ask a stakeholder, what testing metrics would you like to see? They don't always know what to say. But I think it's a difficult question because, like you say, certain points in a project you want to see certain things, and us asking that question, it's not really the area. We have to get that high level, maybe more the business kind of value, and then we have to decide technically how do we actually technically make that or give them the answer and then bring it together in a story format. Because it's difficult for them to understand exactly in the testing world what metrics we must build for them.
And this actually reminds me about my presentation, the good, the bad, and the ugly. The bad and the ugly was two business cases or use cases that we've actually learned. And spot on, Stefan. The one business case was so badly because we as testing reported into the PMO. The PMO's KPIs was we need to deliver within budget on time. Quality was less important for them. They just wanted to get the product across the line. But I needed to, and it was unfortunately lessons learned after a lot of egg on my face, needed to learn that I need to go to the business owners and start bringing them into the conversation and say, you're going to get a bad product because the PMO forces me to have a burn down chart and get through the testing. And when we actually say, and Steve, that was something you said earlier, is when you say testing is red, testing is not red. The project is red as a result of testing not going well. But people don't get that. They think we're red and we need to fix what we actually messed up.
Yeah, and I think, Ezanne, often there's pressure on the test metrics and the test execution results to actually make a project look better than where it actually is. So I think people lose sight of it, and you just summarized it so nicely that execution results, test results, metrics, that actually means nothing if quality isn't part of it. If that's what we should be showing and that's what we should be measuring, the quality, not the execution results. I can execute 1,000 tests in a sprint and my report is going to show green. It doesn't mean that there's quality in there. So to that point, and back to Stefan's point, so if you go into a new environment, if you're going to ask for something, you're not necessarily going to be told what they want to see. And often we need to figure out what's going to be the best to show. Now, we also know that there are thousands of different metrics you can show. And I don't know if you've ever, I have a massive love of stats. And then sometimes you come across a website and they're publishing all of these stats, and like you look at the first two and like you're really intrigued and into it. And then by the time you get to the 15th or 20th graph, then it's just like, well, now everything is just colors and it doesn't really mean anything anymore. And we run the risk of being like that. Sorry. We run the risk of being like that in testing, where you're bombarding people with stats and graphs and figures, and it's almost in that same sort of situation where, well, now you're just giving me so many numbers, I'm not even paying attention anymore. I don't even know what's important anymore. So if we are in that situation where there isn't necessarily a very specific ask around, well, I want to see this and this and this, two questions. Firstly, how many do you think is enough as a minimum? So is that one metric? Is it 5 metrics? Is it 10? And let's assume that you answer 5 or you answer whatever. What are they? And I know it's very dependent on the organization and what they want to see, but what are the high level things that we feel as a group are the most important things to show? So we just spoke about, we want to show quality in some way. We don't necessarily want to show execution results, although the project would want to see that. But how do we show quality in the metrics? And when does it become too much and overwhelming?
I think and I don't have the answer, but I think we are here to show where the risks are. All right. So if you can only tell me one thing about what you've done in this test effort, tell me where my risk is. All right. So don't tell me I've executed 1,000 test cases and 5 of them failed. Tell me the credit card functionality is not working. And that's kind of what you want to know. So what we've done, and Leon, you said it, is we love putting results out there. We love putting stats out there. And that's not the important part. No one really wants to know what is working. Oh, sure they do. But that's not the idea, right? They want to know what is not working. If you can tell me I've tested everything, don't worry about that. These 3 things, that's where your risk lies at the moment from a project perspective. I think that is really what I would want as a test manager want to see, because that's where I need to pay attention, what I need to pay attention to. All the other things are nice, and I need to trust you that if you just give me 2 stats and one saying, I've tested everything that I wanted, these 3 things are not working. That to me is good enough. Rather than just saying all the things we've done and all the things that are working, I think focusing on where these risk areas are and what do I need to do with that information again is I can then mitigate or manage that risk. So let's start reporting on things that are not working. Let's start reporting on things that we feel as risk associated to them, to the people who needs to mitigate or manage that risk, rather than anything else. If I just get that in my inbox, I think I'll be quite happy.
I would probably expand on. I want to know about the risk. So, say if I'm 3 major defects and I report on those, I'd also want to know. Well, I think I would want to know as like say I'm a release manager, is there a focal point or something, or is there starting to? Can you see a trend in the risks that you're finding? So yeah, all the defects we've found are at the API layer, right? So like there's something wrong architecturally with this application at that level, right? Okay, sweet. And I need to bring in potentially more developers for that, or is it another problem? I think as well as I need to know what the problem is. If you can do some limited RCA to say, and it's looking like it's around this part of the application or the project, that's where you'll probably need to focus resources on. I think that's also something I would probably have, maybe an expansion on that metric that Jan mentioned more than a bespoke one itself.
Yeah, I agree, Steve. To me, that's critical. The application layer. So when you create a test case, you link it to the different application layer. Is this UI layer test? Is the API coverage, or is it unit test? If that's part of what you need to report on, and then the area in the system, like you say, what area it's hitting. Because if you've got a list, if you know there's about, let's say, 20 systems in your architecture, and 80% is hitting only the one, then you know there's massive risk. Even though all your 1,000 test cases have passed. And then also on the test level, is it an API test, or is it a modular test? Is it an integration test? What kind of test is it? Is it only for a system? Is it system of systems? So that test level is also important, so that okay, it's the integration related kind of issues that are causing us to trip up. But it's sometimes it's a balance also, because if you have all this metadata, if you as a test analyst now need to capture 10 bits of metadata for every single test case that you create, it's a bit of an overhead. So it's finding that balance also, because you don't want to throw your test analyst under the bus with capturing all that data for every test case that they're going to write. That's very heavy, but then it's rich on the reporting side. So it's a bit of a balancing act, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, I think Leon, in order to answer the question, and this is where I derived with the triangle with the 7 different dimensions, because the increase of the dimensions started telling stories about business objectives and risk and people and confidence and that aspect as well. So I almost would say, in your negotiations with your stakeholders, identify what would be the metric that actually help you to understand that, and guide them, absolutely guide them with bring 5 or 3, top 3 of each of those different dimensions, bring it to them and say, if I give you this, will it actually answer to your need of why you need testing, and what do I need to actually tell you, and address the so what type of scenario. But to Stefan's point is then have the ability to drill down to a next layer and a next layer. That's so that if one would actually click on this to actually get more information, or click on that to get more information, you don't have to go and spend 2 days to actually get that information. It is at hand. But yes, there's still a balance in terms of going to a too low level of metadata that's not necessarily needed, and you actually spend so much time trying to convey it. But I think one of the conclusions that we actually derived to with was test metrics is an art and a science. And the science part is absolutely the frameworks, the ability to gather that information, the ability to showcase it. But the art is exactly what Steve said, is understanding your data, understanding the numbers, and you as a test manager is the only one that can really connect those dots and tell the story to your stakeholders of, oh my goodness, we see a trend in this specific module. This becomes actually a very crucial module. And Mr. Client, this is where your risk actually starts materializing. Yes, we've got 90% coverage, but we might not necessarily have enough test cases covering this vulnerability within the system. And that's how it evolves.
That coverage topic is also interesting, because you could have one test that covers a user story, and in your testing it says, oh, I've got this covered, but how deeply have you actually tested that? Have you really covered every single acceptance criteria in that user story? So it can very easily become a false sense of security if you don't have those quality gates in there to say, I've really created enough test cases now to really test this user story and it's really covered.
Absolutely.
So then, Stefan, I'm gonna be slightly facetious here. Is there actually value in test metrics? So if everyone is doing it in a different way, everyone's looking at a different metric, everyone is measuring it in a different way, I think certain people will see one thing as important, whereas another won't. And as we said earlier, having a metric there does not mean that there's actually quality in your product. I can give you fantastic metrics every day for my entire sprint, and I can deliver, and it's going to be total rubbish. So is it worth doing? Is there value in it?
If we guide the stakeholders, yes. If we help them to choose the right metrics and paint a picture, yes. If it's just a bunch of loose metrics that doesn't really come together as a whole, then I think you can run into the danger of getting a false sense of a false picture. So yes, if it's in the right hands and if it's managed correctly, there's definitely value in it.
Yeah, I agree with that. If you look at, Stefan, but if you look at those earlier slides he's on around the test metrics, and then the people reading that, Stefan, you said it as well. So generalizing test metrics, I think that's what we did wrong in the past sometimes. So you go Google, what are the top 5 things people want to see? And you start reporting on automation coverage and test case coverage and things like that. And in those slides, Ezanne said, if we can't measure it, we can't manage it. And it's if I'm managing a team of testers, then I need certain metrics because I need to manage the team, their input, their output. If I'm an enterprise test manager, I need to manage projects, so I want to see something different. So test metrics, Leon, absolutely, metrics are critically important, but don't generalize the metrics. Look at what do I need to manage, and then what are the metrics that will help me manage that. And I think that's really a good way to approach it, and to make sure that if my boss wants to manage me and the team, then I can give him or her the information that they need, not just general information. So if you understand what you need to measure in order to manage and control that, it will guide you on the metrics that you need. But where it becomes irrelevant is when we just put metrics out there on dashboards that no one really is asking for, and we're generalizing that metrics.
I think also if metrics and reporting and KPIs becomes something that we have to hit. So let's say the department says, I want a 90% coverage or an arbitrary target that you're going to have to report on. That can lead to behavior to chase that metric and chase that KPI that isn't necessarily going to improve quality. And I'll use a use case in the NHS. It's not around testing, but it's actually quite a good one around stats. The NHS emergency department has a target for how long someone has to wait in the waiting room before they're seen. Let's say it's 7 hours. You're not technically on the ward until you leave the ambulance. So a behaviour that was starting to happen in the UK was they would deliberately keep patients in the ambulance longer to let the queue go down before they released you to A&E to start the clock. So that was behavior. That was a target and a KPI and a metric that was set with good intent that was causing diverse and unwanted behaviour, leading to a poor quality outcome instead of the other way around. And I also think that's sometimes an issue, is people just arbitrarily putting a target or a goal for you to report on and hit. And all it does is create behaviour to hit that target without actually the rationale. Is it a good thing to do that in the first place?
See, that would never happen in South Africa, Stephen. Never. Ambulance wouldn't even arrive to pick you up in the first place. So there won't be any of those metrics at play. So we often talk in testing around improvement and iterative. I mean, everything is iterative development and improvement and that sort of thing. So in this situation where you've now defined your initial metrics, what have you found is a good way to implement consistent improvement, continuous improving your metric collection and your analysis processes? So is it something that should happen? So should you constantly reevaluate what you're measuring and how you're presenting that? Is it okay to change metrics mid-project, or introduce new metrics or take metrics away? What are your opinions on that?
Yeah, so I'll go first. Leon, is absolutely, for the mere fact that testing as well as test metrics is a reactive approach. Whether we want to be so proactive and shift left, that's a discussion for another day. But metrics is unfortunately a reactive situation, and I think, to the point, you need to know your stakeholders continuously. You need to read your audience continuously. You need to know when they get bored about things that you tell them that they're not interested in, and where their pain actually is. You need to be in that program meetings to actually know where are the concerns. What is the product owner constantly worried about? When we go live, what are they worried? What is the risk for them? And you need to subtly tune into those things and guide your test metrics to tell that story. Because, yeah, back to what Johan said, is we exist to provide information. So we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater for the fact that people are getting bored with the metrics. I think it's in the storytelling of it more than the numbers.
And would you say it's good practice to review your metrics after, let's say, every sprint? So if teams are still doing sprint retrospectives and they're having those wash-up events, is it actually good to get into a regular cadence of reviewing? And maybe it makes sense that as part of your retro after every sprint, you spend some time with the team and the product owner or the business analyst, and you say, look, these were the metrics, potentially a project manager, these were the metrics we shared in the previous sprint. What was that useful? Was it something that you could actually share to other stakeholders? Do we need to change it? It feels to me like that's a logical point, and you're almost forcing yourself then to measure, to have that conversation, because often we get into a situation where you have a very, very large project, and after a couple of weeks, you realize no one's actually reading the reports anymore because they're not finding value in it. And now it becomes what you said, Steve, a tick box activity. We're just doing it for the sake of doing it.
I think sometimes test managers are scared to ask that question because somebody might ask for something for which they don't have the metadata, and then you have to go and manually rework a lot of information. So it's almost like, but I totally agree. I mean, logically, it makes sense to do that. And not only in retros, but also to your higher up stakeholders. But definitely retros are a good start.
Yeah.
I think I would say, I think like every sprint it feels like a lot. I feel like it's maybe too much. Maybe there's a sweet spot, but I think something I certainly would do, or I've seen work well, is if there's been a major incident or a severe problem, that we, as part of the root cause analysis, where we look at like our KPI and reporting. Okay, say that we got suddenly loads of defects into production. let's look at the last 2 or 3 reports where we're starting to see a trend that was going to go that way, and we just haven't spotted it in time. Right at that point, let's review that KPI metrics and reporting process, and let's tweak it. So I tend to quite like tweaking it based upon an external factor of like, oh, this has happened. Right, let's look at the process. Let's look at the graphs that we've produced. Could we see this coming? And we just haven't flagged it. I think the problem is reviewing it all the time, that the constant review becomes the same thing as reviewing the report. It's just we're reviewing it again this week and reviewing it again this week. Like you're not really going to get much of an improvement. I think you need something to spare that need to review it and change it.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, and I think you triggered something, Steve, in my mind now as well, is in the sense that sometimes the answer is not in the reviewing of the metrics, it's in the understanding of the metrics. Because so often we will, as testing, and I'm talking out of experience of my own projects, is you will say turnaround time is too slow. But the people that needs to help you to manage the turnaround time of for instance, defects, doesn't understand the why of chasing those turnaround times. You need to, as a test manager, tell them the turnaround time is going to impact the rate at which I can deliver my testing and actually do my burn down charge. And as a result, by the end of the sprint or by the end of the project, we're not going to have the coverage that is needed in order to go live, or the quality focus, etc. So that's where I say the interconnectedness. You need to connect those dots for them. In isolation, they don't understand the impact of a defect turnaround time in isolation.
I agree. Okay, so I can talk about this for the next couple of hours, but I have 2 questions and then we're going to finish. So firstly, I think times have obviously changed in terms of how metrics are reported, test progress is reported. Back in the day, you used to send a daily email or an Excel spreadsheet to a project manager. Nowadays, people use Jira dashboards and ADO dashboards. And I guess you run the risk of setting up all of those dashboards and no one looking at it. So how do we actually make sure that our stakeholders are getting the information that they need? Are there practical steps we need to implement, practical things we need to do to make sure that they're actually seeing the information that we want them to see? So is it, as an example, still sending a daily email to say the latest stats are available on the dashboard? Here is the link again. What are those practical tips to do, or do you actually just go and, I mean, I'm exaggerating now, but do you go take screenshots of the dashboard and email that out? What is that? What are those? I guess practical tips to actually just make sure people are looking at it.
I think,
or is having a dashboard fine?
I think that that's good. Dashboards can be fun. I think it depends on I try not to say it depends.
Depends.
Sugar word for me. I should get a teacher. I think if your stakeholder is nervous, right? They're just like, go live's coming in a couple of weeks, and I'm really stressed about it. Okay, I'm gonna report to you a shortened down version every day, just so you've got regular tempo. It's all sweet. There's no stress. Other side of the coin, they're quite chilled out. They're comfortable with how testing is going. I'm going to reduce my reporting to once a week, every 2 weeks or something like that, as a single end of the week email. Here's a summary of what we did this week. Here's what's coming up next week. All sweet. So I think what your stakeholder needs from that information is a big factor in how that's reported. And as a practical tip, the cadence will go down to how worried are they about the quality. If they're really worried about something, they're going to want to know about it consistently all the time. As soon as something changes, they need to know. Or if they're very hands-on in terms of the control of the project. It's another example where the cadence would be affected. So I think they adjust the cadence based upon the need from the project or the person running the show is one of the practical tips I can think of.
Definitely, when you start nearing a release date, then daily is more adequate, possibly, especially highlighting the defects, those kind of things. In the beginning of a project, maybe it's a bit of overkill to send a daily report with 10 graphs. So yeah, it changes. But Leon, that just about your previous question about the pictures, I've played around with both. Thought, okay, this is cool. I don't have to paste things. It's just like a hyperlink, and people are going to click it. And then you realize it's boring because it's just a hyperlink. It's another hyperlink, and what's going to happen? And where's it going to take me? It's going to ask me to do more work. And then I've pasted everything, but then it's like so static. So I've had trying to find the sweet spot of selecting a few ones that are relevant at that point in the project, but just like a snippet, the ones that I think are important, and then have the hyperlink for those that are really interested in the live dashboard that can show them the real-time value. But that's a bit of a human nature experiment that I went through, and I think people are different. People are interesting, but people like colors and pictures. That's staring them in the face. They don't always want to click on a link.
Yeah.
I don't know what the rest of you have found, but it's a bit of a interesting one.
Stefan, I think what we miss here, and I agree 100% in terms of dashboards, but it's almost the education upfront of getting your stakeholders to understand when they look at a dashboard and they see certain things, what is the ripple effect of what they actually see? And I think this is the danger with the automation and the dashboards, is the fact that they see it in isolation and they don't necessarily have context. And as a result of that, misinterpretations actually comes in. So to answer your question, Leon, use the ceremonies to the best of your ability. Unfortunately, a stand-up is only supposed to be 15 minutes, but nothing prevents you from pick up the phone or chat on a Teams message to that one stakeholder and say, I need 10 minutes of your time. I need to share with you something urgent and important, and not just as a test manager, accept that my only time to talk is during the ceremony, and when it's done, my job is done.
Ezanne, you've made such a good point now, and that is we run the risk of becoming very transactional, where we're just sending emails and we're sharing links to dashboards, but we know that the real value is in those human interactions. So actually picking up the phone or walking over to someone and actually saying, look, we've spotted this issue in this area of the application. It's probably going to mean some delay to testing or whatever. Those things are so important. So I couldn't agree more. Okay, final question. Each of you have to give me one answer only. So if there was only one metric that you wanted to measure, what would it be?
I'll go first. And it's just maybe because I truly believe that we're there to reduce risk, and that we also need to constantly sell ourselves as testing and actually continuously prove the value that we have, is the risk reduction leverage, which basically goes into a nutshell of what was the risk before you tested and what was the risk after you actually tested. And that's my favorite one.
I like it.
I don't want to grab a massive one that covers lots, but I think anything around like defect management, so maybe prioritization of defects that are being found. So not only how many did we find in the sprint, but how bad was it or not, or how good was it? I think is a really powerful metric. It's like a very simplistic indicator of inherent quality in something. But that's quite broad. I don't want to steal defects totally because I realize that's quite a lot.
Yeah, mine is even more broad than that, Steve. And that is risk. I just want to know where the risk currently is, right? And I know that is so many dimensions, but it will force people reporting that metric to me to really think about it. So is the risk that we don't have enough coverage? Is the risk that we haven't executed enough? Is the risk that we have too many defects on our things? But I just want that. If you can just tell me what the current risk is, I'll be happy. But I know that's really just a very broad one.
Stefan, I'm going to give you some more time to think because I just want to respond to Jan. I think that's all good and well when you have a senior team and you have people with experience, but we often have people on projects where they a lot more junior, and I question whether the people on the project actually know what the risk is. And I think that's often why we go to the traditional metrics. Oh, I've executed X number of tests, because maybe I'm going to go out on a limb here. And I think if you're junior and you're just at the start of your career, you probably don't even really realize what the risks are in the project that you're testing, even though testing is supposed to mitigate those risks.
Yeah. And I totally agree with that, Leon. And that's why I said we shouldn't generalize metrics. So if I'm a junior tester in a squad, I will tell my test lead or the senior tester, I wanted to do these 5 things. I only did these 3. I'm not happy with these 2 things. It's that more senior person that needs to interpret that into a more risk-based thing. And the person above them again. So it is report what the risk is to you. And if it is, I didn't do enough, I don't have enough time, I wanted to execute 10, I didn't, let the person above you then try and interpret that and send it upwards. So if you build this pyramid of, you don't need the junior person to understand anything about risk, but let them just tell you what they wanted to do and what they couldn't do.
Great. Okay, Stefan, you've now had the most time to think, so you're obviously going to come with the best metric in the history of metrics.
I'm going to blow you away.
Can't wait.
You've all, I can go take the easy way out and say you've chosen all the ones that I wanted to choose. But I think I'll say, I think this is more for me speaking to a junior tester that's testing for the first time. To me, and it's not necessarily the most important one, but the one that's critical to me is when you create a test case, always link it to the user story or the business requirement, because a test case just out in the abyss with no linking to whatever, to me is really poor. So there are many others, but I'm gonna go with that one. The risk of being criticized.
Traceability.
Awesome.
And yours, Leon?
I ask the questions around here. I don't answer any questions. Ezanne, thank you very much for joining. It was really good. Enjoyed the conversation a lot. I was honest, and it probably sounds very weird to say that we can probably talk about metrics, which is such a boring topic for a good hour or two. But in the interest of actually getting people to listen for 52 minutes on testing metrics, I think we should end it. So yeah, Ezanne, thank you very much. We'll definitely get you back on a future podcast. And yeah, I really enjoyed it.
This has been an episode of Testing Experts with Opinions, an inspired testing podcast.